Hi folks, Steve Nixon here at Logic FX Trading, and welcome to our building block series where we're learning Elliott wave theory as a prelude to the competent trader training and mentoring programs. Now, so far we've looked at the waves and structures Elliott identified and the rules he developed for them. Now we're going to discuss the guidelines Elliott proposed for his theory. The first thing we need to do is determine the difference between a rule and a guideline. So let's use our model of an impulse wave to demonstrate it. Okay, so here we have our impulse wave, and so far we've learned Elliott's three rules. Rule number 1, wave 2 cannot extend below the start of wave 1. Rule number 2, wave 4 cannot overlap into the price area of wave 1. If that happens, we have a diagonal. And the third rule is that wave 3 can never be the shortest. So in this instance, if wave 3 was the shortest and we had wave 4 coming down like that, our count is all wrong, because in actual fact what we would be looking at here would be potentially a running flat, or if it came a little bit deeper, we could have an expanding flat, where this is our A, B, C. So therefore our numbers would be wrong. This would be 1, this would be 2, and this would be the start of 3. So you can see why it's very important that 3 is never the shortest wave. So as we know, if any of these rules are broken, then we're not looking at an impulse wave. Now, while these rules help us to identify if a particular wave is an impulse wave or not, they cannot possibly be used on their own to analyse the huge variety of impulse waves you'll encounter on the charts. For example, while these rules say that 3 can never be the shortest, they don't give us any idea of how long wave 3 can be, or how we go about analysing them. So now we're going to look at the guideline that Elliott proposed for an impulse wave, which is called an extension. Okay folks, so here we have a bit of an irregular looking shape that looks like an impulse but isn't quite an impulse because the wave count's all wrong. So how do we go about determining what this is and what's going to happen next? If we take our impulse tool, we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but clearly that's not correct. So how do we go about counting this? Well, if we understand what an extension is, we know that 3 goes there, 4 goes there, and 5 goes there. And how do we know that? Because that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of which make up wave 3. So our rules or our guidelines for extensions are that they can occur in any mode of wave. This extension can occur in any mode of wave. They're the same degree of magnitude as the other waves. So these aren't subwaves, guys. These are the same magnitude of waves as this, and this. These 5 waves are the same magnitude as these. They usually occur in wave 3 or 5. In other words, wave 3 there, or they can occur in wave 5, which would push the end of our impulse on up there. And then what happens after we have an extended impulse? Well, we're most likely going to get a sharp correction. That's just a guideline. That's not necessarily going to happen, but you will see as you work through the charts that often when we get an extension, particularly if we get an extension in wave 5, we get a sharp correction, which will often take the shape of a zigzag. And the final point we have here about extension is that you can actually get an extension of an extension. Now we don't have room to draw that here, but I'll draw it over this side. And they normally happen in the wave 5 position. So let's say this is our wave 5. We can have this is our extension. So that's an extension that would normally come on the end there, but we can have extension in here as well, and it might often be an extension of the wave 5 as well. So when we get 3, 4, this becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have an extension of an extension. So as we said, things aren't just like painting by numbers, guys. It isn't just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. We can get extensions, and we can get extensions of extensions. But if we know that they can exist, if we know that they can happen, and we know where they're most likely to happen, then we're prepared for them. And we can understand where we are in the process, knowing full well that if we get an extension of an extension in the wave 5 position, we're going to get a very nice steep correction. So then we start looking for a trade along here. Okay, hope that explains extensions for you. In the next slide we're going to look at alternation. So here we are back on our generic impulse wave. And I want to show you here what Elliott means by alternation. In a situation where we've got wave 1 coming up and wave 2, as we already know, this wave 2 will be made up of some sort of correction. And we know we've got several types. Here I'm drawing basically a nice flat correction. And we can just put our trend lines in there. And we have a nice flat correction where C just comes slightly below A. The guideline of alternation basically states that if we've had a flat correction there, we're not going to get a flat correction here. We may get a zigzag. Or as we know from earlier on, we could possibly get a triangle in here. So that's Elliott's alternation, and we'll find it in a lot of places, not just in impulse waves. We'll also find it in corrective waves, and particularly when we look at double threes and triple threes. Okay, so here we have a generic horizontal double three. This is exactly the type of thing we looked at in the last video, where we have a zigzag, we have any three as a connector or an X wave, and then we have a flat. Elliott suggested that the purpose of these horizontal moves is basically a time extension. When the market is basically consolidating and waiting for some sort of news, may it be an interest rate hike, may it be an oil, a move of an oil, may it be a speech from a head of a bank, whatever it may be, they're waiting for some sort of news, some sort of information, and therefore price just tracks sideways and it ranges until the information comes out, whatever it may be, and then we'll get our next impulse. So these are basically time extensions as opposed to the price extensions that we saw in our impulse. This is a time extension. But as we said earlier, we can also see alteration in these corrective structures. If we have a flat here, chances are we'll get a triangle here. If we have a zigzag here, the chances are we'll get a flat or a triangle. So that's our alternation. This will not be the same as this, and vice versa. In this final slide on extension and alternation, we have a look at our double zigzag. And in this situation, we're not looking at an extension of time alone, we're looking more at an extension of price. As we said earlier, when you see a double zigzag, it often has the form of a diagonal, and that is a diagonal movement, not a diagonal as in described by Elliott, but price moves down in a diagonal fashion as opposed to horizontally as we see in a double or triple three. So price here has moved significantly down from where it started. So this is our amplitude, and in the other direction, as we saw earlier, it is our time. The form of what Elliott described, the structures, their form is always the same, but they vary in time and amplitude. In other words, all impulses look like impulses, all zigzags look like zigzags, all flats look like flats, but they will vary in their time and their amplitude. And it's by understanding that variation that we start to gather information together that allows us not only to analyse what's happened, but to forecast what's going to happen next. Okay, and then finally we'll just have a quick look at wave equality, which is very, very simple. And what it basically states is that where we have an impulse, it's often the case where two of the waves will be very, very similar to one another, or almost equal in their magnitude and in their amplitude. In other words, this wave and this wave, 1 and 5 in this situation, are both of the same magnitude, and they're also of the same amplitude. And we can measure it simply like this. We have measuring tools, but from a simple point of view, we can measure it like that. Now, yet again, it's not paint by numbers, guys. It might extend a little bit more or a little bit less, but in general terms, they are equal. And this also applies to things like zigzags, where we have an A, B, C correction. It's often the case where an A wave will be equal to the C wave. So what's the advantage of knowing this? Well, if we've had a 5-wave impulse and we're approaching the top, but we're not quite sure where the top's going to be, and we're looking for a short trade, if we measure wave 1, it'll be a very good indicator of whereabouts wave 5 will finish, and then we can start to look for a sell setup. And in a similar fashion, when we have a zigzag coming down, or any correction in actual fact, we often have wave equality. So we have our A coming down, we have our B, which perhaps will only be that size, and then we have our C wave, which will be a similar amplitude as our A wave. And that's Elliott's wave equality. Now, all of these little guidelines and little rules slowly but surely add together so that when we start to look at live charts, we can bring all of our rules and all of our guidelines together, and we can start to analyze what's happened. And because of what we know, we can project with a high degree of probability what's going to happen next. Okay folks, that's probably enough information for one day. So we'll end it there, and we'll pick up the story again in our next video, which will also be about Elliott's guidelines. But this time we'll be looking at the depth of corrections and channeling. I'm Steve Nixon. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.